So good morning everyone and welcome to today's Intermediates Soft Pastels art class. Today's subject is this gorgeous little chicken. So chickens are such a lovely thing to paint because they have character and lots of texture, and I think this one's going to be lots of fun to do. So I'm going to flick my screen over in a moment to my table and we'll get started. The first part of the class is about doing a charcoal drawing. So if you have your art diary or drawing paper ready and some charcoal, then we'll be able to get started on that section. So I shall just flick my screen around. I've only got a small class today, but that's okay. It's school holidays here at the moment, and some of the borders for the COVID restrictions have just been lifted. So lots of people have taken off to the beach and having a lovely time. I'm just trying to get my iPad to play. I'm not doing the swiping thing very well today. There it is. So this will now be looking at my iPad, which is situated above my table. And hopefully now you'll be able to see my drawing pad. So I'll just make that a little bit bigger. And I'll just make sure that everybody's muted as well. So yep, everyone's got their microphones off. So the reason for that is just so that there's no background noise and no interference. If you do want to speak or ask a question during class, please do. It gets a little bit lonely sitting here talking to myself for 2 hours. So feel free to speak up and ask anything that you want to ask. So I'll just pop a few more lights on so that that's a bit brighter and easier to see. So as I said, this is our chicken drawing class. And the first part of the class is always about doing our little black and white sketch. So I've got a black and white photo on the notes page there, and that's for you to refer to. And the main things we're looking for within this is the darkest darks and the lightest lights and then all the mids. So it's just about drawing it all in charcoal very quickly. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on this section, and just getting familiar with the picture. You can see there's grid marks here on the colour version. So that's to actually help us draw the picture up and find where everything sits within the grid marks. That helps with perspective and it helps to get the drawing right. And it's important to do that because if you don't get your drawing right at the beginning, then pretty much nothing you do is going to fix that. So let's get started. I like to use most of my page. So if you draw up a thumbnail area or shape in about the same dimensions as the picture that we're doing today. So this is a landscape picture. So it's wider across the top, a little narrower on the sides. It's designed to fit into a 23 by 30 pastel page. So, and that's a tiny little bit bigger than an A4 page. So if you have an A4 page, then it should fit in there quite nicely as well. Okay, so now we've got this square or rectangle drawn in. What we want to do next is pop some grid lines on there. Now, if you're a particular person and want to get everything measured up perfectly, then by all means use a ruler to find your grid marks. So what we're doing is putting a line halfway across and halfway down, and then dividing those marks again into smaller sections. So this now becomes a range of 16 squares basically. So it's 4 by 4. So you've got your halfway line, and then we divide those sections into half again. This is a really great way to help you draw. Helps you find where things need to sit within the picture. So we'll do this again on the colour version, but for this section, this is just a little rehearsal. It's just a way to rehearse the picture, become familiar with it, and work out where everything needs to be. So once you've got your grid marks drawn in, then it's time to start to look at the picture and figure out what's in each little section. So when I'm drawing something like this, I find it's often easier to cover up, for instance, paper. So maybe I could cover up all of that section of my picture except for this left-hand row, basically. And then I can look at that row and look at my left-hand row that I've drawn up here. And I can kind of figure out where all the lines and things need to be. And on this particular section, there's only a little bit of the chicken's back that you can see, that line across there. And then in the background, which is blurred off, there's the back of the chicken. And that shape runs like that. So they're the shapes and the lines that you want to be looking for within each little section. And then I can see that above those grid lines in that left column, the top one is empty or dark. Then it comes down, it's still dark. Then we've got that funny little shape there, which is the back of the chicken. And then we've got this line running across through here, which is, that's his tail and that's his back. And so that's all the information you really need to get into there for right now. Just the main lines. Don't worry about all the tones and colours and stuff. We'll look at that in a minute. Once you've done that, then move across into the second row. Okay, so now I'm looking at this column here, and I want to get all these pieces that I can see into that column there. So in the top section, I can see that there's this red crest. Or at this point, everything is a shape, isn't it? Doesn't matter what it is exactly. It's just a red shape. So I'm just going to draw that shape in there. And as we move across and join all the dots and things, it'll start to make more sense. But at this stage, if you're drawing something that's quite complicated, it's a lot easier to break it down into pieces like this. So down in the second square or segment, we've got the side of the face, but that's just literally a little shape that comes out from the line and then on a little angle, and then it comes down. And then as it comes down into the next segment, you can see there's quite a sharp line or turn that goes down here. And this one that we drew earlier comes across. So they meet there in a V shape. Make sense? So at the moment it looks like hills or something, and that's okay. We don't need to make sense of it just yet. You can see also there's the little bit of red that's coming through on the third square or section down, and that's part of the chicken's face as well. So you can mark in that shape. Okay, so now let's move across to the next row, and I can see that there's a lot more detail in this one. So when you get to sections like this that might have, a lot of information, then you might be better to maybe cover up each, row and just show each little square. I'm just using whatever I can find to cover things up with. That didn't work very well. Let's see if my phone will work. So my phone can sit over the top of all of these, and then I can only see this top segment here. And so that's all the information that I want to be looking at for now, because otherwise your eyes sort of wander down into this other area and you might confuse yourself. I know I do. So I find it easier to break things up into pieces. So what I'm doing across here is just drawing that line, continuing across from that red section we drew in the last column, and then drawing in the shape that I can see of that red bit. And just noticing where it sits within each little segment. How far from the side is it? How high is it? So obviously I need to make my square a bit taller so I can come all the way up through there. And just marking in the lines and the shapes. And so basically we're putting this red section in. So draw the outline of that, and then we've got the side of the head that comes down right onto that centre mark there, centre line. So that's probably enough information in there. Or you could actually bring this section down here, because you can see there's a little bit, that dark section in there. It's the top of the head under the crest. So we can bring a little line down through there, and that's probably enough information for now. So the shape of the crest, or the top of this, I don't know if it's called a crest, that's what I'll call it today. And then the angles and the lines and the shapes of all those pieces. So just look at everything as an outline. Don't worry about all the colour and tones yet. Just look at the outlines and mark those in. Then we'll move down into the next one. So this one, this little square or segment has quite a lot of information, doesn't it? And again, you know, if you cover parts up, it just helps you to break it down into pieces so you don't get too confused. So this section has a little bit more detail, and we can actually draw this in. We'll just go gently. So down the side of the face hits that center line pretty much exactly on the line. So just draw a line down through there. So that's the side of the face. Then we've got this eye. Now the eye is, it looks like a heart shape on its side. If you try to find shapes in things, and it really helps you to kind of draw what's there. So I can see a sideways heart shape. So the little shoulders or the top of the heart are on the left side. And then how far down does that fall within this segment? And it's about to there. So it's not halfway, it's shorter than halfway. And I'm looking at the outside of the eye. So that's the section underneath where the shadow is. And then we've got this sharp angular line that comes down. So the point or the bottom of the heart is on the right hand side. Don't forget your kneadable eraser is your best friend if you want to rub something out. So see that little shape I've drawn in there? That's the beginnings of the eye. And then we can work with that and then mark in the round eye. And so you can see that eye sort of, the round eyeball comes out and then across, and then it goes back under the skin on that right hand side. And then we've got the little pupil that also sits under there. So some of it is hiding under the brow or under the skin. So that's going to give us that glary little chook look that we want. What I really liked about this image was the front on perspective of it, and it's going to be a challenge, but it'll be fun to you know, just draw that. Okay, so we've got that heart shape in there, and then there's a bit of a line or a shadow under there. So that's basically the basics of the eye. Then we'll come across and we'll draw in the rest of the nose. So I can see that the nose, or the top of the beak, see there's a little C shape there, like a crescent kind of shape coming down from there and into the beak. And then we've got an interesting, kind of little bit complicated shape of the beak, but basically it's just a straightforward line that comes down into there. So all the detail we'll be able to do with tones and texture. But at the moment, we're just looking at the lines. Next, we want to get in the shape of the beak. So that will sit at the top of the red section, on the top of the nose there. And then it comes across, and we've got a line coming down through there. So it's on the right-hand side. And then it's like a nostril or something, isn't it? So there's one on this side too, but it's not quite as obvious. And then we've got this big, what looks like almost a triangular shape here. So that's like the nostril part of the nose. A little shape that runs across through there. So it's a little bit more complicated in that segment. There's a bit more detail. So if you wanted to then carry over to the back over to the left-hand side, your left, and where it comes out from the beak down towards the bottom, there's, you know, some interesting little shapes in there. So everything's a shape. Just look at it as a shape. Everything has its own little shape or design. So that's very, very busy in that section there. And just make sure that you get your lines in the right spot. I'm just going back up to the top right corner of this little segment because we can see where the crest joins onto the face there. And so there's a little V shape just in this top right corner here where they crisscross over. Cool. And now I'm going to move down into the next little segment. So this one's a little bit easier. It's not quite as complicated. So I can come down and do the shape of the beak. So the bottom of the beak leaks off into there. And then we've got the red beard thingy. I don't know what that's called. I should look all these things up. I say that every week and then I don't do it. I guess as an artist, I don't really care what it's called. I just want to draw the thing. So on either side of the beak, we've got these long red scraggly bits. And so let's draw those shapes in too. And you can see that comes down through there. Can you see how this is starting to come together? So just breaking things down into little segments and working on one piece at a time just simplifies it a little bit and really helps you to get started on your drawing. Sometimes if you want to draw something, you might feel a bit overwhelmed and think, oh my goodness, I don't know where to start. So start with a grid. Start in the corner. Lovely. And then if I take my cover off the bottom section, there's a lot of beautiful tone in there. So, you know, there's not any really strong lines. It's all just feathers. So I can just gently, lightly mark that sort of detail in there. We'll come back to that afterwards. So I think we're well on our way to drawing a chook here. And then we've just got to move over into the far right side. And again, we can, you know, continue to do the same thing and just cover up each little segment and focus on each one as we go. So in this far right segment, you can see the top of the head continues across from the last time. And it comes down the side and it's not quite halfway across in this segment. So probably about a third over. And then, so that's all. Oh, I just need to put this little bit of a crest, edge of a crest here. So that's now all that section pretty much ready to go. And then I'm coming down into the next segment, the bottom one. I just heard a sound. I'm just going to see if everyone's still here with me. No, I've lost Lynn. Okay. She's Gornsky. Hopefully she'll come back. The bell should ring. Okay. And so we'll continue on over into this segment here. So you can see the line, the edge of the chicken's face sort of comes across on a little angle and then it comes in down probably about a third of the way in from the edge of your page and then it down further and then it goes off the edge of the page. So now we've got the side of the head marked in. That's the main line that we needed to have. Lovely. And now I'm going to do this other eye. So let's have a look at the shape of that. It's a similar shape to the one we've just done, but there's less emphasis on the little heart section. So the part that's, you know, dips in. So I'm going to call it more like a triangular shape. So the top of the eye, you can see the skin at the top of the eye there, starts just above this line in the top corner. And then it comes down. Now what I want to do is make sure I don't get too close to the nose. So we've got to keep measuring with your eye the distance between the edge of the beak or the side, you know, the grid line here and where the edge of the eye comes to. So it comes to about there. And then how low does it go? So it's actually sitting slightly higher than that left eye or out on our left. So this right eye sits up a little bit higher than the other one. So maybe he's got his head tilted or something like that. It's all those slight little nuances or angles and shapes that tell us, you know, how something's moving or what position it's in. Okay, and so that's kind of the shape of the eye on that side. It's more like a triangular shape. It's got kind of a point, a soft point on the top, and then it comes down, it sort of rounds out around the base and then goes back up the side. And the eyeball, I don't know if you can see that, kind of bulges out a bit on the edge of the eye section just here. Okay, let me see. I'll let Lynette back in. There she is. Welcome back, Lynn. I heard you go, and so I was waiting for you to get back in. All right. So we've just, sorry? Oh, your sound's not working now. Sounds really strange. All good? All right. Lovely. Oh, there, I'll turn you down. There we go. It sounds like you've got gremlins in there. So we've just done this right-hand side of the face, Lynn, and what we were doing was putting the eye in, and I was talking about how this eye on the right side is slightly higher than the one on the left. And so it sits just above that grid line. Can you see that? So the other eye sits right on that mark, but the right eye on our right sits slightly above it. And so we can put that up a little bit, but then we also need to make sure the bottom part of it is higher as well. To check those kinds of things, all you need to do is grab a ruler and just, you know, hold it down onto your reference photo. And I can see clearly now that this eye is definitely lower than that one. So, you know, often you might need to measure something with your ruler, figure out, you know, how far out from the edge of the page or whatever it is, and calculate things that way. So that eye is definitely higher. And the little eyeball bulges out of the side of the eye. I've coloured in too much of that now, but your kneadable eraser is going to be good to get any charcoal off. So we're just looking to get the main shapes and things in at this stage. Okay, and so I'm in this bottom second down quart or section now, and what we want to do is draw in some of the marks in there. So we've got the little side of the beak that comes across there, and then we've got that lovely long red floppy bit, and so the other half of that is kind of inside this segment now. So see how I've just literally drawn the outlines of these things. I'm back over onto the other side of the face, and I can see there's another little red feathery kind of shape just there. And then we've got feathers coming out through here. And then all the rest is just feathers. So essentially that's all we needed to get in for the drawing section of this one. So it is a little bit detailed, and there's a little bit of, you know, things to be aware of when we're doing the face. And I mean, you could make this quite abstract and fun if you know, if you can't get it quite right and don't want to be doing it in a realist fashion, you can always just have a bit of fun with it, you know, put some eyelashes on it, or, you know, don't care too much if the eye's a bit wonky or bigger than the other or something, and that will make it, you know, more fun and yeah, something you might enjoy doing. So don't be afraid of that if you feel like you want to, you know, have a bit of fun with something. So now we've got our main lines drawn in, and it's time to just now start to look at the tones. So I'm not going to spend hours and hours on this because this is just our little rehearsal, and we do need to draw this all over again when we get onto the pastel paper. But just to get an idea of the tones is a really good way to just cement everything in your mind about the picture and where everything is, and that will help you determine what colours you're going to use. for it. So I've just picked up a little short fat bit of charcoal because I find that much easier to move around if I lie it down on the page and just let it sit on the side. I forgot to pop the tail in over there. There we go. That's better, isn't it? Looks a bit more complete now. And so first up, let's quickly look at the background. And I'm guessing we might be in a chook pen or a shed or something, because one half of it looks like corrugated iron or a wall of something. And if you don't want to put a background in, then don't worry. You don't need to. You can just leave it undone, or you can make it all into green or blue for sky or whatever you fancy. I'm going to do what I can see because that's what we're here for. But you feel free to leave it if you've got a nice coloured paper that you really like and you just want the colour of the paper to be, you know, part of your art, then by all means feel free to leave that as it is. But what I'm looking at while I'm doing this is the different tones. So I can see, I'm saying corrugated iron or something because I can see the shades of light and dark in the back there. And I like that. I think that's quite nice. It just kind of makes it a bit more interesting, I think. So I've put some light marks down and some darker marks, and then I'm just pulling it through with my fingers, just very gently, just to try and get that gradual tonal look going on. And I'm just going to leave that as it is for now. On the other side, you can see there's greenery. So maybe there's a farm or trees or something out there, you know, grass that's green. So what I'm looking at for this part is where is the darkest area. And so I can find that on the black and white picture. So if you look at your black and white version of the printout now, up in that right corner, it's much darker than, you know, over here, for instance, where there seems to be some sort of light or blur. So I'm just using my charcoal to communicate the tones. So tone is from light to dark, and I'm just very carefully looking at the tones in there and going from dark up the top right corner, and then sort of being a bit lighter with my mark as I move down to get a different sort of softer tone. So that's all I'm going to do on the background. That's enough for now. Let's start with this little tail at the back here. So as I said earlier, it's quite blurred and it's also lighter than the background. So these are the things you need to be looking for. What sits in front of what, and is that lighter or darker? And if it's lighter, then you want to make sure that it, you know, has a fair bit of light in it. And maybe I've just realised my background needs to be a bit darker so that I can add some more tones to that back tail feathers. But again, there's not a lot of detail in there, so I'm just going to smoosh my charcoal around gently, follow the kind of vague shapes that I can see back there. Because it's further away, it's blurred off, and so we can't see all the detail. And we don't need to. It's absolutely fine to leave that just sitting back there in a blur. Okay. Now, as we come forward, again, looking at the tones, so just refer back to your black and white picture. I must say too, at this stage, if you want to take out the grid lines, they can be distracting sometimes and a little bit hard to cover at times. So if you want to remove those, just give yourself less confusion, then just grab your kneadable eraser and take them out. If you're sure your drawing's in the right spot, then you can remove all of those. And then we've got a little bit more freedom to kind of look at the tones in the feathers here. So I'm just going to do this really quickly. And I want you to do it quickly too, because if we do it quick, then we don't get too attached to it, right? What I'm doing is I'm looking at the direction of the feathers. And so all these ones on the left-hand side, on the back of the chicken, kind of swooping in one direction, aren't they? And then as we come around up into the neckline, they all kind of swoop around up into there too. And what I'm doing is using my charcoal, a little stick of charcoal on its side. So I'm keeping it flat on the page and I'm just pulling that around like this. And so that's giving me a nice feathery kind of effect. If I was using the tip of it, then I'd just be getting hard lines, which is fine too in certain areas. In fact, that's good for the dark bits. but they're hard lines and they don't have a lot of softness about them when you use the end of your charcoal for a sharp hard line. So if you want soft lines, just use it on its side. And the same theory applies with pastels, and we'll get into that afterwards. So you can get these really lovely, feathery, soft marks. All you need to do is make sure that you're moving in the right direction, so in the direction of the feathers, basically. So I'm going to come all the way across up under the beak here with my charcoal stick on its side, and I'm still doing these little up and down movements because underneath all of that is where the feathers are, and I want to try to communicate the texture and the feeling of those feathers. So I just want to do that all the way across and see how that just automatically looks like feathers, and I don't have to do too much more work to get that to have some texture. Then you can come back up. So now under the beak, I'm looking at the beak, it's quite light compared to everything else. So what I want to do to make that even lighter is make sure that I get those feathers underneath the beak nice and dark. And also around the red bits that hang down. They're a mid-grade and not as dark as the feathers, but they're lighter. And so again, we want to make sure that the feathers beneath those are dark so that we can see them. So if everything's the same tone, it just becomes a big dark mess. So checking where the darkest sections are and making that nice and dark so that we can then see the mid-tones on top. Cool. So that's basically all the feathery bits done, except for the top of the head, but we'll get to that in a sec. And then we've got these red thingies hanging down from the sides. And now just run your charcoal around the page lightly. What we want to do is just get the tones right. So different tones in different sections. You can see on this right-hand side of the face, it's a little bit darker at the back there. And then the feathers that are closer, or the part of it that's closer to us, is a little lighter and it's catching the light. So you can do these little marks like that to indicate the wrinkles or the texture of the skin around the face there. Just light little marks. I'm using the end of my charcoal now because I'm going to get a harder line, and just do these soft little marks like that. And then I'm going to come up into the top of the head and do feathery marks again. So these feathers all sort of go upwards, don't they? So we want to try and indicate that just with these upward movements of your charcoal stick to get that direction of everything going on. And then we've got our crest. So again, refer back to your black and white picture because that's going to help you find the right tones. Tones are so important in paintings. It's what gives you the shadows and the lights. There we go. And on the beak, we've got a nice little bit of a shadow down that side there. So we could spend a lot more time, working on this, but I think for now, at this point in time, that's probably enough because I really want to get stuck into the colour one before we do run out of time. So that's just a little practice exercise to get familiar with the picture and to just take notice of different things. Oh, I missed that bit there. There's a little red bit there. Another one over there. So now's the time to kind of cement this in your mind so that when we draw it again on the pastel paper, you'll already have some familiarity with it. Cool. I think the eyes are the funnest part, aren't they? All right. So I'm going to just take a little break. I'll be back in 2 minutes. And in the meantime, if you want to either finish that off or start getting ready for the next segment, I've got some paper here that I'm going to do my pastel on, and I've got to select some colours. I'll be back in a moment. Okay, sorry, I had a handyman at the door to go sort him out. All right, So let's get stuck into setting ourselves up for the colour version. Keep your charcoal nearby because we're going to be needing that to draw this up again, unless you're on a dark paper, and then you'll need a pastel pencil. So the first thing I've got to do is find my paper. So I've decided to use this colour today, just because it's a good neutral colour, and it's called rose grey. So it's a kind of a pinky grey colour, and I can see a little bit of that in the picture here. So at the back of the chicken, there's some of that colour, and in the wall there. And I think it'll be okay on here. I'm going to fill it all in anyway, so it doesn't really matter. If you are not filling it all in, then you might want to use a black paper or something like that that is going to, get the chicken to stand out, basically. Okay, so first off, we've got to tape this down, and I usually just tape it on the corners if I'm sitting flat on a table like I am today. If you're on an easel, you might want to tape the paper all the way around just so it stays still and doesn't fall down. When you do tape it, make sure you don't stick the tape down too firmly, especially if you're putting it all the way around the whole page, because it can tear it when you take it off. So just be careful with that. Okay. This is called 14-day tape. It's what painters use. So it's supposed to come off quite easily and give you a nice crisp edge. But as I said, it can stick if you leave it for too long. So make sure that you either put it on your clothes before you stick it down, just to get some of the adhesive off, stick it onto a cloth or something like that to remove some of the stickiness. Okay, so I've got my paper taped down onto a little board. My board is good because that's going to give me a nice firm surface to paint on. Because it's taped down, I don't have to hold it there. So it just means you're freeing up a hand. Next thing we're going to do is draw up our grid lines. So if you haven't done that yet, now's the time to do that. And a little tip is if you have a border around your page like this one, this is the Colour Fix paper, then put your little marks there and there and there, because if you need to find them later on, to remember where something should be within the drawing, and you've filled it all up and covered them all in, then if you've got these little marks around the edges, you'll be able to find them a lot easier and work it out. So 5 3/4. So what I'm doing is I'm just marking in my halfway and quarter marks with my charcoal. As I said, if you're on a dark paper, you might want to use a light pastel pencil or a white charcoal pencil to put your marks down. I like using charcoal because it's actually quite easy to get off. If you just press lightly, so I'm just pressing lightly, you don't want to press too hard, and then it'll come off quite easily, especially if you're going to leave your background unpainted and you want to remove your grid marks later on. So just press lightly, you don't want to press hard. When you're on this kind of paper and you press hard, it kind of sticks really well, which is what's great about it with pastels, because it's got so much grit. But when you want to get it off, sometimes it's a little difficult. Okay, so I've got my page drawn up, and we're going to do exactly the same process as we did before with drawing up the chicken. So this is the, part 2. This is the second time we get to do this. So having done it once already will make it a little bit easier and more familiar. So let's start on the same side as we did before and just mark in that little tail shape. I'm going to go all the way across into that grid. So you can cheat if you feel like, oh yeah, I can just, keep going across there. Then by all means do that. So we've got our basic 2 lines there, and you can see I'm still pressing quite lightly because I want to just make sure that, my charcoal doesn't stick too much to the paper. So they're my lines for the tail and the back, the line of the back of the chook. I did go across and put that one in extra, but anyway, let's go back up to the top and do this in a methodical way. So again, we can do the little red crest coming out from the side there. And again, if you're getting confused with too much information, just cover up part of it. That way, everything is just a shape. It's just a shape and a line, and it doesn't have to be anything. And so that's what actually makes it easy to draw something, is when everything's just a shape sitting, you know, within the grid line. So all that section down there is feathers, so I'm not going to worry about that. And then we get into the complicated bit. So I'm going to cover some of this up with my board so I can't confuse myself. And get some paper or something. I'll just use my ruler and hopefully that'll distract me enough so I won't look at that. So I'm looking at this top. This is the complicated part. So we need to really focus on this bit and make sure that we get all of the bits and pieces in the right place. Okay, so we'll do the shape of the crest that comes across the top there and down. Got the tiny little bit of the top of the head poking through there as we come up into the other little bit of crest, which I should take back over there. So always checking the distance. I was going to put that in the middle of my segment, then realised it was right up against the next line. So this is why the grid is so important, because you can actually really get quite precise with where you put everything. Okay, so that's like the crest shape. And then I can see there's, you know, that shadow bit in there underneath the crest on the top of the head. So the head shape comes down through there, and then it actually comes down or on that center line, doesn't it? Because that's what we found last time. It was right on that line. And then following down into the segment here. So I'm not going to continue the crest over into the next right-hand side because I can't see it just yet. I've covered all that up. Just trying to focus on all these little sections as we go. Okay. And then down through into the next segment. So this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. Honestly, if you just break everything down into shapes and lines, so looking at the side of the beak, you know, it's a little rectangular shape there, isn't it? And then we've got that funny little nostril thing that sits, so it's, where is it in here? So halfway, just above, just slightly below halfway, and then up through here. So that's like a diamond kind of triangular shape there. And then we've got the beak shape, so it comes up and across. So we've got this lovely ridge. That will be important later because we want to put that beautiful shadow down on one side, and that's what's going to make it kind of look 3D. I came over too wide there, so keep your eraser handy to take marks out. So you can see that it takes the charcoal off really nicely. It doesn't leave a stain, which is nice. Okay, so the shape of the beak, let's look at that. So it comes down and down through there. So it kind of flares out a little bit, doesn't it? It's got this arc at the top and then spreads, slightly flares out down towards the bottom of it. And then we've got this shape coming around here. So from the crest, the red crest that goes up into the top of the head, the edge of that comes down around the outside of the beak. And then it comes down through there. Keep measuring with your eyes from the distance between the lines. And we've got the top of the red hanging down bit there. So that's pretty much the lines and marks we want to get into that section. But I just got to do the bottom of that crest here because it's kind of wrinkly, isn't it? It's all really wrinkly and looks very sort of scaly and rough. It's a bit rough. Okay, now get over into this eye. So The eye starts about there, comes across, and it doesn't come quite to the edge of the face. So we've got this little bit of red or feather showing through. And it's that heart shape. And then it rounds out and comes back up into this point here, like that. So it's a sideways heart. And then we've got the eyeball. And so that kind of comes all the way to the edge of the heart section and in through there. And then we've got the pupil. And the pupil is inside to the right. So he's almost looking cross-eyed. You could have a lot of fun actually making this funny, making this a bit of fun. Cool. And we've got some shadow under the base of the eyelid there. Just marked in a bit of shadow. That's all feathers. Just checking the distance between the side of the face and so the middle part is about there. Yeah, that's about right. Might be a bit wider. There. Cool. So that's that part. And then we can move down into the next segment below it. So we can continue the beak down into there. And that's where we get that lovely bottom edge of the beak coming around. We've also got a little bit of that red gill or flappy thing coming down into that section there on the right. And then we've got the whole of it on the left-hand side coming down through here. Something like that. Cool, cool. And then under here is all feathers, so we don't need to worry about that just yet. So now we can move across into the final row, basically. So again, I'm going to cover that up with my board so I don't get distracted. We can look at it afterwards and refine everything. Okay, so this one has the edge of the head coming down through here. And then we come in and it slants off. I'm just going to run that all the way down to the side of the page so that I've got my shape of my head in there. And then we've got a little bit of the red gill thingy, or not gill, what's that called? Crest, poking through on that side. We've got a little bit of this moustachey thing coming through here. So that red bit that's coming out from the beak. So that comes around through there. And then we've got the top of that other red hanging thing that comes down there. And then we've just got to pop the eye in. So remember, this eye sits up a bit higher than the other one. So it starts just above that line, that grid line, comes down, same kind of shape, but we can't actually see much of the right-hand side of it because the eyeball kind of sits over the top of that. And then how far down inside this quadrant does the eye sit? So I can see halfway is about there. So if halfway is there, then it won't come down quite that far. So it comes down to about there-ish. I'm looking at the bottom part of the eye where the shadow, the saggy eyelid bit is. And then we've got this big round eyeball that kind of bulges out over the edge of the eye. And then we've got the pupil in there. As I said, you could have a lot of fun making this quite comical. I think that's why people love doing chickens, because they are quite funny to look at. There's strange expressions on their faces. Okay, so I've got all that sorted out, and then just coming down the side of the face, there's a little bit of a line there. And then we have that red gill thingy on the far right. So that comes out to there. And the rest is all feathers. So now what we want to do is look at the whole thing and realise I didn't put the rest of this gilt thing in over that side. That's okay. And so now is the time to kind of look at the whole picture and just make sure that everything's sitting where it needs to sit. And, you know, the space from the eye to the nose is right, and the space from the eye to the edge of the head. So on the left-hand side, there's less space between the eye and the edge. On the right, we've got a little bit of skin and texture there. So I'm just kind of wandering around this with my eyes and my charcoal to make sure everything is sitting where it needs to sit. Yeah, cool. I think that's near enough. So that's the drawing of our chook so far. Once we get the darks and lights and things in, then it'll start to look a little bit more real. Cool, cool. All right, so that's good. That's good, good, good. Okay, so once you've checked that and you're ready to start looking at some colours, then you might want to take out some of the grid lines. So I'm going to take out some of the ones that are in the background. And yes, I'll fill that up, but I just don't want them in there in case they do show through, or in case I decide not to cover it all in. So I'm going to leave them inside the drawing of the chook, just so if I lose an eye and can't remember where it went, there'll be hopefully a little bit of a reference mark. As I said earlier though, if you've got your marks on the outside of your page, so I can just see them very slightly, if I colour all this in later and think, oh, where was that eye? I can kind of hover over it with my ruler and figure out, you know, where each segment was and kind of work out where it needs to sit if you've lost your grid marks further in. So it's always good to have those little markers around the edge if you can do it. All right. So now what we want to do is start looking at some colours, and I haven't pre-organised that, so I'm going to keep talking while I go over to my pastel palette and start to find some colours. The best way I find if you want to do something in realism is to take the picture with you and kind of colour match as you go. So I'm going to go and grab some colours and talk about that as I go. So if you want to do the same thing, let's start in the background. So if you are doing the background like I am, I can see some greys and purples in there. So maybe like a cool kind of purple, and then something a little bit darker. I might go with a dark grey, I think. Yep. Then on the other side, we've got some greenery. So that's, you know, trees or something. So you probably want a couple of greens, something in the mid, and then possibly something a little bit darker. Could be a phthalo, could be not quite that dark, phthalo dark. So you shoot it, and then I've got a blue violet as well. So my Flinders blue violet, that's my favourite dark that I use on everything. So that will come in handy for the darks. And now that's the background done. So now I want to look at the chook. So the chook has definitely some reds. It's not a really bright red though. It's kind of a more, it's got a pinky tinge to it. So there's a bit of white in that. However, if you want to do yours super bright red, why not? Go for it. I love red. I think the redder the better. So I'm going to get a nice dark rich red. And we need some brown. So that's kind of a reddy brown colour. Like a sienna or something like that. A couple of browns. My blue violet will do for the darks. I'm also going to grab a bit of orange because I think it's some orange in the feathers will brighten him up a bit, give it a bit of life. And a creamy colour for my highlights in the feathers and on the beak. So we want a little bit of something like an Australian grey, or nothing too white. We're going to save the white for things like the light in the eyes and the very edges of a couple of spots on there that are highlighted. Colours in the beak. It's kind of a more of an umber kind of colour. So maybe some like a sandstone terracotta kind of colour for the beak. And we can use a bit of the blue violet in that as well for some shadow and tone. I'm going to use an orange for the eyes. And what else do I need? I think that'll do for now. You can always go grab more colours if you need to. So that's what I've got at this stage. So I've got a purple and a grey for the background. I'll just get my sketch again and just do some swatches on here. I think that's grey. I'm not sure now. It's kind of a bluey colour. It's quite nice though. So that might be nice for that background section. And a bit of purple for some of the light. Purple will also be lovely in some of the feathers too, because purple gives you some beautiful shadow colours. I've got my blue violet, which is my usual darkest. And if you don't have that, then maybe a black or something equally as dark will be helpful. Then I've got my browns. So there's lots of brown in this chook. Put a couple there. There's not a real lot of difference between those two, just only slightly. Might find another one afterwards. I've got red. My lovely bright red, that's nice. I've got dark green, which I thought was quite nice. And then I've got a grassy green as well. So they'll be quite nice in the background, those two together. I have orange. I thought orange will be fun. That's nice for the eyes and also a bit of the highlights in the feathers. And then I've got these two umber kind of colours. One's a little bit lighter than the other. So they'll be nice for some lights. And I'll probably have to get white because I didn't put white in there. And I'll save the white for last. So that'll be for the little bits of highlights in the eyes and on the beak. So I'll grab a bit of white. Lovely. Okay, so that's our colour palette. And we can get cracking on that now. Get started on that. So let's put this fella aside. If you, oh, I think you ladies will be organised enough. We don't need to wait, do we? Yell out if you want me to stop and wait for you to pick out your colours and get organised. Otherwise, we'll just get stuck straight into marking in some, do some blocking in if that's all right. If you're watching the video, of course, you can always pause it. That's the beauty of the video. All right, so I'm just going to get myself organised here. I've got my reference photo next to me on the table, and I've also got it up on an iPad next to me so I can see what's going on and I can zoom in on it. So it's really handy to have it on another screen if you can. If not, then don't stress, it's okay. And I've got my paper and it's taped down and everything's all drawn up and ready to go. So the first thing we want to look at this point is getting some dark in there. I'm also going to keep a bit of charcoal beside me. You never know when you might need some. And I've got my towel here next to me so I can tip the dust off onto that as I go. Try hard not to blow it. So I'm just going to start in that background section, and with my dark, I've got two colours for my background. I've got this dark bluey grey colour, which is really quite lovely. I don't know what it's called. It's nice and soft. And I'm just going to pull that down. As I mentioned earlier, it's like stripes in there. And so I want to kind of try and convey the feeling of that, but I'm not going to spend hours and hours refining it at this stage. The reason we're doing backgrounds first is because then we don't have to get in around the chook later on to get stuff in behind it. So I like to work from back to front, which sounds a bit opposite, but it works really nicely. If you get your background done, then you can focus on what's in the foreground and not worry too much about having to get back in and touch things up later on. So I'm just doing these little stripe kind of marks with the side of my pastel. It's a reasonably short stick, so I can just pull it down onto the paper, and you can see, because this paper is colour fixed, it's got quite a lot of grit. So you can see the texture of that showing through, which is a great thing when you want some texture in your artwork. Make sure you overlap the edges just a little bit so that you have a nice continuous background behind your chook. And then I'm going to put some of this purple down as well. So I like what the purple and the blue do together. It's kind of nice. Now, I'm also pulling this one down on its side, but I'm running it up and down vertically because I want a narrower line, I guess. If I pull it this way, it's going to make a wide line, and I don't want it to be that wide. So you can pull it the other way and still get a nice loose kind of mark on your paper. Just smoosh a bit down through there too. So now I've got that down on there, it's about getting some pigment on the paper, and I'm going to just pull it through. And again, I'm going to run my finger, as I blend it in, run my finger up and down, because that's the direction of the shape that I want to create. And so I'm leaving my finger on the paper, and I'm literally running it up and down, and hopefully that will give me the feeling that I'm trying to create in this background. Make sure you do overlap your edges of your chook a little bit, which is kind of scary because then you think, oh no, I'm going to lose my drawing. And you do a little bit, but it'll be all right. And so I'm just running across this again and just seeing if I've got enough pigment on the paper to fill that in enough to do what I want it to do. Okay, so I quite like that. It's quite nothing, it's not anything, it's just a nice sort of background that is, you know, sort of going to be pushed away and not really noticeable. But in a lot of ways, backgrounds like this are important because they kind of place the picture somewhere. So, you know, we think of chooks and farms and things like that, and I can hopefully see that this would be in a shed or a chook pen or a farm or something. So it kind of gives it placement. So I think that'll do for now. And see how it's just by pulling my finger across and blending those colours gently in between each change of colour, they're just starting to look like, you know, it might be some sort of wall or something with texture in it anyway. So that'll do for that bit. Easy peasy, see, nice and quick. Pastels are lovely and quick. If you want to fill a big area really fast, that's all you need to do. Super quick. I've just got a little cloth here. One end is wet and the other is dry, so I'm wiping my fingers off on the wet end, and then I'm going to give them a wipe on the dry end. So now I can change colours basically, and my fingers are reasonably clean. If you went straight from that to your greens, you'll end up getting all that dirty colour into the green, which is, you know, not a bad thing, but today I want to make sure I have a nice pure green. So this is my green pastel. This is an Art Spectrum Extra Soft. They're beautiful and they're super lovely to use. I'm lazy, I haven't taken the paper off. Often, you know, I won't take it off because I want to remember what it was called, but I can't see what it was now because that bit's been torn off, so there's no point keeping the paper on there. So that's the size of those, and what's really nice about these is they're so versatile in their shape. So I can lie it down like that to get a nice big wide mark. I can tip it up on its end, still get a reasonably wide mark, but not quite as big. Or I can turn it on its side and get a nice sharp edge. So they're quite versatile, and it's a lovely soft pastel. So I really like how this works. That's the Art Spectrum Extra Soft. So if you can manage to get yourself some, it's definitely worth it. I keep buying the sets. So I've got the green set, the purple set, and the lights and things. But they're just versatile. You actually don't need to break these. So that's a bit of green. I'm just smushing some green around on the background there. What I want to do is push it into the paper and then sort of leave some of it nearly uncovered, because you can see in the photo there in the back it's kind of blurry and lighter. So if I let the paper show through underneath and be the lighter part, and then some of the green can just kind of be blotched around. And then I want to darken up in that top right section. So this is a different green. And we'll all have different greens, so don't stress if yours is slightly different to that. So I can put a bit of that in there, just lightly, because it's a strong colour, it's very soft. And when I blend all this in, it'll just all kind of merge in together. So now I'm just getting it. And what I'm doing is imagining what this background is. So if I'm thinking, well, it must be trees or bush or something like that. So I'm trying to do kind of shapes with my fingers that would be in the shape of bushes. So on the other side, remember we did this big up and down lines because that was the shape and the direction of the thing. But on this side, it feels more natural and like trees and stuff. So what I'm doing is little, what I'm going to call bushy marks. I don't know how else to describe this. Little squiggly marks, and running my finger around in different spots and just doing little round fluffy marks. So hopefully that'll start to look a little bit like it's foliage or trees or, you know, something like that back in the background. If I did big up and down stripes like this, then it wouldn't look like that. It would start to look stripy. So it's a little bit like if you were painting with a brush, you would move your brush in different directions and you twist it and you know, do different things to get different effects. And so you can achieve exactly the same thing with your fingers. Just got to think about what it is you're painting and the direction that it is moving in, if that makes sense. So that's the background, pretty quick and easy, hey? If you wanted to put more light in there and add more bright bits, you could. I like that it's got a bit of light, actually. I might do that. It's got a, see this light up here. So I'm using white. I normally don't use a lot of white till the end. If we lighten that bit up, then the chookin, when we put the chook in, he's darker. He's much darker than that light part there. So he's going to kind of pop forward and dominate. And so the light sections behind him, her, whoever this is, will help to emphasize the edges of the chook because it'll be a darker tone. If it was a mid-tone, it would kind of all merge in together, you know, and get a little bit lost. But because we've got this lighter tone here, and you can brighten that up even more if you wanted to, and then we'll put the dark browns and things at the chook on there, it'll just make him pop more. So I'm going to leave my background as it is. And as I said, it's always easier to do your background first rather than try and get in there later on around something else. Because pastels are so movable, I suppose, and pliable. So it's not like it's going to dry and then you can hop in later and do something. They don't dry and they're not wet. So they are consistently, what's the word, malleable maybe? Because technically you could leave this for 6 months, come back and it's still going to be exactly the same and you'll still be able to move it around and, you know, add to it and things. So when you're working with pastels, it's a good idea to just think about the order of how you're going to apply the pastels and where you're going to apply it so that you're not trying to get around things. You're going to smudge something if it's in front because it's all very pliable. All right, so we've got a bit of background in there. I am going to take a little 10-minute break because I think it's time for a cuppa, and I've been talking for ages. So we'll do that now, and if you haven't got to this stage yet, that'll give you a chance to catch up. And if you have, then it's also a chance to go and have a break, get yourself a cup of tea. So we'll come back in 10. It's 10:45 now, so we'll come back at 10:55 if that's okay. Feel free to jump ahead though if you feel like you want to grab your blue violet and, you know, start to block in all your darks around here, etc. See, can't help myself. Then go for it. Jump in and do that. So the next stage will be blocking in dark areas and then some mids, and then we'll be blending, and then we'll be putting more on and building up the layers. That's the fun part. All right, I'll see you in 10. Okay, now we're ready to get cracking on the blocking in the darks. So when I start, painting something, I usually like to block in all the sections first. So that's about just getting some pigment down onto the paper, and getting all the tones in place. And it's surprising how quickly something starts to kind of take form as soon as you start to add the tones. So if you look at the picture of your chicken and just study where it's darkest, and you can often find that in the black and white version as well. And you can see it on the colour version as well. So for instance, up underneath the bottom of the beak, it's really quite dark in there. So all I'm doing is lightly running my blue violet, which is my dark blue violet dark, around on the paper and just getting a little bit of it down here and there. So I'm not pressing hard, and I'm just doing loose light marks because I don't want to fill it up too much. So the risk with pastels is if you put too much down at the start, you can actually fill up the paper really quickly, and then you can't kind of add any more over the top. So it's always better to start off lighter and then build up as you go. So it's a little bit of a process. You can technically, depending on what kinds of pastels you use and what kinds of paper you use, but with this paper and these pastels, I can usually get around 6 or 7 layers on there before it starts to say no more. So at the moment, I'm just running around this very lightly with my darkest colour. It's my blue violet. So instead of black, if you don't have blue violet and you've only got a black, then use that. That's fine. Just whatever is dark or your darkest that you're going to use. Sometimes I like to kind of use the blue violet for my blacks, and then if I want to make it even blacker in some places, I can add black later. So it's a little bit like saving the light for last. Sometimes you've got to save the dark for last. So I have lightly just run around this picture with my blue violet, and I've blocked in very gently where it's darkest. Now, what I'm going to do is push all of that in with my fingers, and then we'll come back with some other colours. So technically, I'm just going to push this in to the paper. So what I want it to do is hold on, and I want it to kind of stick to the paper so I can then get some more layers over the top of it. This is building up all the shadow areas. So you can see that all the shadow parts that are darker, where the light's not hitting it. So under the beak and under the crest on the top of the head and around the chest area on that right-hand side is where it's kind of got lots of shadow and dark. And so by pushing this in, it's starting to create a really nice shadow base that we can build on. So you've got to kind of think in layers when you're doing pastels and build it up from there. A lot of pastel artists don't like to blend. They don't like to push it in with their fingers like this, and that's cool. It's a great process. I really enjoy painting that way too. But I enjoy this even more because just to get that base colour down really helps when you're building up the layers on top of it. And as we build the layers up and move towards the top part of everything, then we stop blending so much, and you then it's more drawing, I suppose. You start to do more loose marks and let them sit on the surface, and then that's when you start to create the beautiful texture. But if we have this beautiful shadow under everything, then it gives us a lovely base to build on. So you can see I've just pushed all of that into the paper. So now it looks a little bit all smudgy and a bit messy, and you'll have filthy fingers. And if you feel like you need to add more dark, then do that. But just make sure you don't put too much down, because we do want to add other colours over the top to build this up nice and thick. So before we go much further, I'm just thinking in the logical steps of, what do we do first and second and third, etc. And we probably should get into that tail area at the back there, because that's behind everything else. So if we get the back stuff done first and then move forward, it'll make it a lot easier. So let's get into that bit, and you know, you'll end up with a big schmozzle, a bit of a mess. This will look really messy, but don't stress, we'll sort it out. It's all part of the process. And the purple's beautiful because purple in shadows is such a lovely, lovely combination. As I said, if you don't have the dark purple, then even a blue, dark blue, or a dark grey would be fine. And black too, if that's all you've got. You've got to use what you got. All right, so you can see on my page here, I've got quite a bit of dust just kind of gathering around the edges there where I put my background in before. So rather than blow it off and put it all over my computer, I'm going to tip it up and pop it onto a little hand towel that I've got here next to me. And so I can then take that outside and shake it out later on. And so I didn't really get rid of much of that dust. It kind of stayed there, so I have to push that in now. It'll just have to become part of the tail. There we go. So looking at the tail part of this fella, it's kind of purples and greys. It's similar colours to what this background was anyway, which is kind of handy. So what I'm going to do is pop a bit of purple in there. So this is a lilac kind of mid-tone purple. And I'm just going to blotch that where I can see the darkest sections. So even though this has dark on it, it's not as dark as the darks in the chicken at the front, if you know what I mean. So it's a lighter tone of dark. And again, look at the black and white picture and you'll be able to see what I mean. So it's not as dark as in here, but it's definitely darker than the lighter sections. So I've got a bit of purple in where I can see some shadow, and I'm just going to push that in a little bit. Okay, and I'm kind of moving my finger in the direction that I think the feathers grow in. So again, always thinking about what it is you're painting and the direction of it. Sorry, mouthful of coffee. Okay, now I'm going to grab this colour. I don't know if it's going to be too light or not, but I'm going to try it because it's sort of the colour I can see in the tail, and it's a browny grey kind of colour. And what I want to do is just get the outline of this. So it's kind of that shape, isn't it? You might have lost a little bit of the shape when we put the background in before. And this is what happens, you sort of lose your edges a little bit, so you've got to find them again, which is another reason to do the charcoal rehearsal, because it just helps us to remember. I'm just blotching this in where I can see the lighter parts. And you can see the kind of layering of the feathers in this funny little arc kind of shape. Now, I don't know if that's the right colour yet. I think we might need something slightly darker, but I'm going to push it in and see what happens. Sometimes when you mix colours together, you get a lovely surprise, and often it'll, you know, if you choose the same sort of colours as what you've got in the rest of your subject, what we want to do is make these a little bit muted. But when you blend things like this, you can create some really lovely greys and muds, and purples, you know, don't have to stay bright purple. They can turn into really nice, soft grey kind of tones, depending on what you mix them with. And so that's looking okay. I wouldn't mind blurring it off a little bit just around the edges, because I don't want it to be really strong or dominate. It's kind of in the background and I want it to stay there. I don't want that to be a feature. I'm just going to soften those edges a little bit. To do that, I'm just running my finger around the edge gently, gently, doing little wiggly movements just to get some softness on the edges there. So that's just, you know, a suggestion of a tail back there in the distance. I do feel like I need a bit more dark inside that. I'm going to try this darker blue that I had on that background section there, because everything reflects everything. So often if there's a colour in one spot, you'll find it in another. And it's good to actually use the same colour a couple of times in some different spots, just so that everything kind of ties in together. Looks like it belongs. So I've used that dark blue that I had in the corrugated wall part, and I've just smushed a bit of that around in where I can see some dark shapes. And I think that's probably enough information for there. Just soften that edge off a little bit. So in this spot up here, I feel like I didn't come down far enough with my wall, and so it feels like there's not enough pastel on the paper now in between the you know, the tail of my chicken and the back of the wall. It's looking a little bit thin around here, but you know, I can always come back, and this is when you want to do this sort of thing. You notice these things early on, then you can get in and sort of fix them up before you get too far into it. So I can tidy up that edge a little bit and make it a little bit thicker and richer. That's nice. Now, you're probably thinking, but there's white in that tail. It's really light and bright. Yeah, it is, but it's not. Don't make it white, because if you do, it'll come forward and it'll be too much. It'll be too bright and it'll sort of dominate the rest of your picture. And we want this to kind of be off in the background and not obvious. So don't use white for that sort of thing. This is a light, it's like a sandstone colour. It's probably an umber or something. And I'm just using that instead of white for those light sections. So by now I've got about 3 colours in here. So I've got my light, my mid purple, which was my light initially, but because I've got this lighter one now over the top of that, see how it's starting to create a really nice kind of shadowy textured effect. So the purple underneath is giving it that lovely shadow feeling. And I'm not going to put too much more detail into that because I don't, as I said, I don't want to draw attention to it. So I'm going to leave that right there. Okay, so now we've got that bit done and we can now start to work forward. Let's look at this section here. So this is the back of the chicken, and according to my picture, it's also more behind all this gear. So even though it's off to the side, I can see in my picture that these feathers here off the neck sit in front of this back area. So they're kind of coming down over the top, aren't they? So we need to get this area done first, so then we can put all that over the top. So let's focus on this part here. And I can see that there's quite a lot of these lovely oranges. There's a bit of orange in there, and there's some brown in there. So kind of those colours. Maybe the orange is a bit too bright, but we can mute that down with the brown. So I'm going to draw that shape back in. So the shape of that, remember, see, I can still see a little bit of my grid line across here. So I can still figure out where that needs to go in relation to my grid mark. And I know that line comes up through there like that. So that's now the back of the chicken, and it's sitting in front of this tail part, which now that I've done that is looking way too green. But anyway, just put a bit of this, smush this a bit around to tie it in with what we're about to do. Okay. You can always get back into something afterwards and fix it if you need to. It's just a bit harder if you've already got things in front. So I'm just going to pop a bit of this colour down here, and I can see that it's actually lighter on the top side, isn't it? Because the light's catching the edge of it there. I'm going to pull that across like that. Because I've got colour already under there from the previous section, and I've got a bit of dark in there because I smushed that down in there before. And as you drag your finger around, it kind of picks everything up and pulls it around. So I'm starting to get that lovely texture, and the feeling of the texture. Definitely too much green in there. Now, how can I fix that? Well, I can pop some green in here to tie it all in. So I'm going to actually do that. That's this greeny blue colour. I might use that as some of my dark under my browns. And that way it's going to tie it in with the tail section that I've done back here, and also give me a really interesting combination of colours that will kind of go earthy brown once I add some browns. So I'm pulling this in. See the direction these feathers run in? I'm pulling my finger around in that direction. So it's got this beautiful sweepy kind of feeling going that way. And then as we get to the bottom of the page, it's more horizontal as they come up into the neckline. So I've pulled all that in, I've pushed it all in, and now I'm going to add some of my brown and pull that around as well. And again, I've got my pastel, little piece of pastel on its side, so I'm getting a nice wide mark. I don't want anything that's too thin and like a hard line. I just want to keep all of this really soft and sort of feathery, because this is feathers, so we want to make sure they feel soft. So to have something like that feeling soft, we need to make sure we do soft marks. Again, if you had a brush, you would be pulling it around, you know, really softly and kind of twisting it and getting all these different shapes or feelings of feathers in there. I really like how that greeny blue colour is reacting with the brown. It's just lovely. It's creating such a nice grey kind of combination. And if you know anything about colour and colour wheels and things, you'll know that blue and orange are complementary. And so this is basically what we've created now, is this blue-orange complementary blend of tone and colour. So I'm picking up my lighter one again. So this is my sandstone kind of colour. And just noticing where there's light on these feathers. So again, I don't want to use white yet because I'm going to save that for last and pop it onto the lightest areas. But now, as we work the layers up like this, see, I've put some light down on there. If I pull it through but don't push too hard, it doesn't blend it in as much. So I could push really hard like this, and it would just all turn to grey. Right, so see how that's all blending in now, and it's just getting all smooth, lovely, but it's gone all kind of flat again. If now we want to build up some texture and feeling of feathers, then we need to start to press lighter so that these marks that we're making sit more on the surface and don't kind of become, you know, blended in with everything underneath. So again, I'm using the pastel on its side, short little stumpy piece, and I'm just pulling it around in the direction of those feathers so that I'm trying to get that lovely sweepy feeling of the feathers. And now I'm going to come in with some dark brown and do a similar kind of thing. Just noticing on the picture, keep referring back to your reference photo, where is it darker? Where is the, you know, the brown darker bits? And make sure you kind of try and make those feathery marks so that you get the feeling of feathers. And so they kind of crisscross a little bit over each other. So they all run in a similar direction, but we've got some that kind of overlap slightly, and so that's when you start to get that lovely textured feeling. I'm going to come back in with this dark blue again, because I just love what that's doing, and put a few little marks in there, just where I want some dark. So again, I'm using it on its side, but I'm kind of tilting it a little bit more towards the end so that as I run it around, it's got a soft mark, but it's pressing harder on one end. So I'm still getting kind of a firm line, but not too hard or sharp. I don't know how else to describe that. It's like holding it flat. So flat on your page like this. And then when I pick it up, I just tilt it very slightly. So I get this mark, I don't know, like that, not like that, if you know what I mean. So it's just about learning to manipulate the pastels and get them to do the shapes that you want, whether you use the sides or the ends or the tips, because you can create so many different feelings with them. So that's starting to look quite feathery now, because I've just been doing these sweepy sort of lines and crisscrossing a little bit. And now we're kind of playing between the dark and the light in the mid. So I can come back in with a bit more light now, put a few light feathers in there. Again, on its side, tilted very slightly, and then just getting that lovely feeling of thickness and layers. Got another brown there I haven't used yet, so I'll see what that one does. It's a little bit darker. And this is, this is how we make fur and feathers, is just by layering like that and building up on top of each other. So now I've done that, I feel like I need to add more brown into this back section because it looks like it doesn't belong now. So this is the sort of thing you need to kind of review as you go. Put a bit of brown in there and smoosh that around just lightly. Again, I don't want to draw attention to that section too much because it is off in the background, but at the same time it needs to look like it's part of everything. Cool. So that might do for that section. At the end, if you want to come back in, we can lighten up, with white or something brighter to get a few of the highlights back in there. Just pop a bit of orange in and see what happens. I do like to have a bit of a play with colours, and oh, that's nice, isn't it? So the orange kind of warms it up a little bit, gives it a bit of interest. Yeah, nice. And so by working in one section like this, you can kind of figure out what colours you want to use, how they're going to look together, and if that's, the overall feeling that you want to create with your painting. You might not like the colours you've chosen, and if that's the case, then you have to go back to the drawing board and choose some others. I quite like what's going on here, so that's cool. So we've got that section done, basically. And as I said, you can come back in and highlight a few spots afterwards if you want to. We could do it now, whatever you like. I'll just show you as an example. This is the lighter colour that I had before. So it's the one I was using instead of white. And so you can see how much brighter that is compared to the other colours. And then if you just use that on a few little bits of highlights, it just gives it that little bit of shine. So you can see on the picture here, you've got a little bit of shine. So that must be where the light's catching those feathers. And it kind of helps us to see the curve in the shape of the body. Okay, let's move on. So now we've done the background, the back tail, and then this part of the chicken. So everything is coming closer to us now. Next thing I'd like to do is focus on all the feathers in the chest area here, and then we'll move up into the head because all of this is sort of under that, basically. So let's do that. So I'm going to grab this blue again because I really like what that's doing with my browns. And I'm just going to use that as a base for my darks as well. So I've already got the blue violet and the dark colour down to get some of the shadow in there. This is just going to add, even more depth and warmth to the feathers. And you can see how they kind of all layer over each other. In that section, they're quite thick and chunky. So again, I've just used this on its side and literally just marking, feathery marks like this, keeping it quite loose. All right. And then I might just push some of that in. So again, I'm going to push it into the paper because I want the pigment to hang on to the paper, and then we can start to build up on top of it. So that's going to give us a lovely base to build on with the browns and the oranges, and it'll tie in with what we've already done over here. So don't be afraid to try different colours too. If you feel like I want to put a bit of blue or whatever in there, then why not? Sometimes when you do that, you're really disappointed and you think, oh, I wish I hadn't wrecked it. But it's all about learning, isn't it? Now I've got my brown and I'm going to do the same kind of thing with that. So again, just these strokey marks. Thinking about the layering. So if we do the bottom section first and then move up towards the face, because that's how the feathers are sort of layered over each other. You can see they're sort of sitting out over the top of each other as we get closer up towards the head. Again, I've got it on its side and I'm just doing these little kind of feathery strokes. As we come down the side of the neck here on the left, you can see there's a little arc in the shapes as they sort of come around and they land on the shoulder, or just here that overlaps that back section that we just did before. So just noticing the direction of things and the shapes and pulling the pastel around in those directions, because the pastel, it's your brush. It's the only thing you've got to get any kind of texture on here. And then your fingers are the things that you can, push it around with. There's also blenders, of course. So if you have any blenders, they're helpful. I'm just blocking in some of the brown sections that I can see up into the face and over those red bits, just to get a bit of colour down on there for now. It's just a base. I tend to do that if I've got something in my hand and I kind of look around the picture and think, where else is this colour? And then pop it down on there. It's all just about building up your layers and laying your foundations, basically. So there's a lot of that reddy brown colour up in the head where all those feathers are. Okay, and then I've got this other brown, which is not very much different to that one. It's a little bit lighter, and that's a good thing because, again, it's going to give me that beautiful feeling of texture and layer. So as we do this, we're sort of stopping blending. You don't want to be putting your fingers into this anymore. What we want to do is get it to all sit on the surface and build up the layers. So you can see now, as I'm putting these little lighter brown lines on over the top of what we've just done, it's starting to look quite thick and lush and feathery. And again, I'm going from the bottom and working my way up. You can see right under the beak, directly under the beak, there's a bit of feather, and then there's a really dark area in here that doesn't really have a whole lot of detail. It's just sort of dark because it's obviously further away and there's shadow in there. So if I push this in with my finger, just in this section, that's going to help to create the shadow and the contours of the chicken. So that will kind of push everything back in around the neck area, and it'll bring the head forward, and it'll make the feathers feel like they're coming forward too as they come out from there. And now I'm just going to focus on building up these feathers nice and thick up here in the chest area, down in the front there. And I want to do the bottom section first because that's underneath. And again, pulling it out over through the neck area here. So that's starting to look lovely and feathery now. Now, how are we going to get the next section to sit in front of this back area that we did? So the way we're going to do that is with a little bit of colour and slight change in tone. So I've got my orange because I just love orange and what that does. And of course, as I said earlier, if you want to use other colours and brighten this up and make it your own, by all means go for it. So what I'm trying to do now is bring these orange feathers sort of around over the others. And you can see in that section there, those feathers are lighter. So they're catching the light, which must be up above this guy. And so as it turns down through here, we're catching some light just on the edges, and it's giving us that lovely feeling of this section, these parts of the feathers are on top of the other. Hope that made sense. Just going to put a few little smudges of orange through here. Not quite as much, but I still want to have a little bit. And then we'll quieten them down with a bit more brown, just to grey them off a tad so they don't dominate too much, because what we want is for the shine or the brightness to be on this side where the light is. So I've just done a few little random feathery marks through here. Just keep checking the shape and the direction that they run in. So you can kind of pull the pastel around in those directions. And then I can come back over with my other brown. I feel like I need another brown, something a little bit lighter. Anyway, we'll carry on and keep pulling that around. So what I'm doing is building up those lovely layers nice and thick. Make sure you overlap the edges of the little red bits and things, because when we come to do them afterwards, make sure you've got your feathers all sitting underneath there and you haven't got halos or gaps around them. So it's a bit of a test of patience. If you were doing this with pencils, it would take a lot longer because your pencils are much finer. Get a lot more detail though. Pastel pencils are great for getting the detail. Lovely. All right. And then see on here, I picked up this light one, which is the light one I had earlier. And I just want to highlight some of these feathers here. And so when you want to highlight or get, the colour to really sit on the surface, and you're not going to push it in with your fingers, if you press hard, and of course, again, depending on what pastels you've got, the super soft pastels, you probably don't need to press very hard. They'll stick anyway. And just get that brightness of the colour to stick to the paper. And so by doing a few little highlight marks like that, so I haven't used white, I'm just using this very light sandstone colour that I had at the start to highlight some of the edges of those feathers, because you can see where they're catching the light on the shoulder here, where the neck meets into the back area. And so I just want to make sure that that's really highlighted in there, because all the other feathers, that as you come around the front of the face and the neck of the chicken, are darker, and it's all much lighter on the left. So we want to make sure that we grab some of that light to highlight that there. That will become a bit of an eye-catching feature as we move forward. Cool. All right, so I'm just going to put a little bit more, see what this one does in here, just to get a bit more thickness in the feathers. It's a bit like doing grass. Grass is a similar process. You just got to keep building up the layers. So I think that might do as far as feathers go. Put a bit more blue in here just for fun. You could always pick up your blue violet or your black or your dark again and just put a few little marks in there to darken it off, especially in this bottom right corner because it's quite dark there. And so the secret is to make sure that you get your tones, if you get your darks where it's dark and your lights where it's light and all the mids, that's what really gives something life. It brings it forward. So you've got to really make sure you do that and notice that stuff. It's important. I'm just going to darken off again under the chin there with some of this blue because I want that to be nice and dark so that those little red thingies poke out more. And it also gives the impression that the neck's kind of concaving away from us. Cool. I'll put a bit up here under the crest as well. So now we're going to move up into the head area. So what I want to do first is work on the actual head and get those little feathers working on the head up the top here. Because again, it's a similar process to what we've just done, only they're shorter. They're shorter little feathers, aren't they? So I'm going to pop some of my blue down first because that's my dark, and I want to kind of put that down as a base. smush some of that around where I can see other dark bits too. So you can see those feathery bits kind of around the edge of the head, like the side of the head, and then it's hard skin around the beak area and the eyes, and then as it goes up into the head, we've got more feathery effects. So what we want to do is build that up a little bit. So same little colours, but just make sure you do shorter marks. So when you're doing the shorter marks, that's when you want to be using probably the end of the pastel more so than the side, so that you get like a harder line, and just do these little marks. If you've got pencils, then you might find those really useful for this part, because again, you just want to get those short, sharp, feathery little marks in there. Don't forget the very top of the head in between the red bits too. There's a little tiny bit of head poking through there. And so just by drawing these little lines in here like this means that we're getting that nice feathery feeling. We'll have to come back in and put a few more in around the nose once we get the bases down in there too. Cool. Something like that. And then I'll just do a few more lighter ones, just a few lighter ones towards the front of the face, because if the light's coming from above, then it's going to be catching just around there. So we can highlight those bits. Awesome. Sorry, the page has gone all screw-riff. Okay, now I can see, what do we need to do next? Probably let's work on the eyes, because the eyeballs are kind of inside the outer eye. So we need to get the eyeballs done. Just got to tip off some of my dust. So I've got a nice clean space to get stuck into. Okay, so the eyeballs are orange. So let's make those orange. I've got my orange pastel here. Sometimes it's hard to kind of get into small places, and that's when you need to be able to have a bit of a sharp edge on your pastel. Something that's got a point or an edge on it. Now, don't worry about being too precise. We just need to get this colour down into there, like that. Very bright, I know, but once we dab it in and get some other colours around it, it'll grey off a little bit. Where else do I need to put orange while it's in my hand? I might pop a bit up into here. I know that's not orange, but when I put red over it, it'll just kind of blend in nicely. Plus it also, you know, ties it in a little bit. So I'm going to smush a bit of orange. There's also some in the beak. There we go. So we've got orange eyes. Now, if you grab a finger and just kind of dab that, it'll grey off a little bit and go less bright. So I'm just dabbing it with my finger. We can pop the pupils back in a sec. And you can see the left eye, our left, looks a little brighter than the other one. So we can always add a bit more orange to the left eye if you wanted to brighten up that part of it in here. And then we can kind of fiddle around a little bit with some brown. So I can see on the right eye, it's a little browner in there. So what I'm going to do is pop a bit of my brown over the top of it. And I'll pop a bit of that also on the top left of the left eye up in there, because that looks like it's got some shadow on it. And again, just dabbing that in with your finger. When you dab, you kind of push the pigment into the paper, but it doesn't blend too much. So that looks right. And then we've got to put the pupil in. So I'm going to use my blue violet for that. It might not be dark enough. I might have to try black, but I'll start with this. So the tricky part is getting it round and nice to fit in there. And because there's so much dust with my pastels, it just kind of leaves a little puddle of dust on the paper. Okay. Now, other thing you can do is use your charcoal. That's why I kept my charcoal nearby. So sometimes charcoal's really handy just to do stuff like this, to get into the little bits where you can't maybe quite reach, or if your pastel's too big, sometimes your pastel sticks are too chunky. And again, that's when pencils come in really handy. Too much dust again, tip that off. It's so tempting to blow it, but I don't want to end up with it all over the place. So I happen to have a pastel pencil here. It's a black one, and so if I want to get something nice and black and into a small space, then I can use that. And this is nice and black, isn't it? These pupils, they're going to pop because they're black, especially on the orange. That one looks a bit weird. Okay, while I've got my pencil in my hand, I'm just going to kind of run around the outside of the eye because there's a little bit of shadow there. Now there's feathers that sort of sit in front of this eye here and come out over the pupil, so I can put those in after. So if it's looking a bit weird, and like it's, you know, not seeing right, the little feathers come out in front of it afterwards, so that'll kind of give him that quirky look. Okay, let's tip off my dust again. So we've got about half an hour. Let's get stuck into this. I'm going to pick up this sandstony umber colour because I can see that in the eyes. Can you see the skin around the eye? There's a little fold here, top left I'm looking at. It comes up like that. It's just a little crest that sits about there. And then underneath the eye as well, we've got a similar feeling under there. So that's like that. So see how by popping that on, it brings the eye out because this is a lighter tone. And then we've got shadow under that, so we can darken that off with the other colour in a sec. And then I'm just going to run this around in the eye a little bit more because I want to just lighten off that orange section a bit. So this is where it's a little fiddly and you need to kind of spend some time refining it, I guess. So pencils are awesome. So if you don't have pastel pencils, then it's worth investing in a couple, just so that you can do the detail like this, because it's frustrating if you can't get into it with a stick of pastel. Okay, then we'll hop over to the other eye and put this colour in there as well. So it's not quite as bright on that side, so it's a little darker. I'm going to pop it down anyway, and then I can quieten it down with a darker colour. So it also has this little raised brow kind of thing on the top. Again, it's not as bright. And then I can come back under that, so there's shadow under there. So you're just kind of noticing all these little bits of shadow in the eye. And this eye comes all the way out, doesn't it? Kind of bulges out further than the edge of it. And I can just run over that very softly with my black pencil just to dull it down a little bit and give it some shadow. And as I said, then we've got these little feathers that kind of just come across the top of the eye there to give him that almost cranky look, really. A bit of a cranky, funny little look. And there's a nice little shine on there that we can pop on after too. And I'm just running over to this side, so there's shadow under there. So the bottom eyelid has a bit of a shadow just in here, which again will give him some dimension. Cool. And so what else do we need to do? So we need to get some feathers. I can see red feathers in there. So let's grab some red now and have a bit of fun with that. Around this eye, I just want to focus on this left eye for a sec. Get some of the red feathers in around there. So, and see how they come across the eye there. So it's almost behind the feathers. Might need a bit more of a brown feather in there just to darken that off a little bit. And then up around. Down the side of the left eye, there's a little bit of red feather just down through there. It's not much, very narrow there. And then under the eye is kind of red and brown as well. So I'm going to put some red in there. We can pop some more brown on over after. I'm just going to get some of this red on. Like that. And then bring some of it up into the forehead as well. Just a little bit to continue that on. Now I feel like all this light area around my eye is a bit light, especially on the top section actually. And I'm just going to use my black pencil to put some more feathers in there. You can see there's some darker ones that sit sort of over the top of the red skin. They're not red feathers, they're red skin. And then it's got little dark feathers sitting over the top. I'm just going to blend some of that in a little bit because I want to get it to hang onto the paper. Put some on the other side while I'm at it. Some red over here and red skin around the eyes up here. So we kind of need to make sure we get it all matchy, so you haven't got one side with red and one without. I'm smushing some red on there. Oh, put some down in here too. One on there. And then here. Pastels are quite loose, you can't, well you can if you try hard, and I have managed to do it, get very precise with it. You can do very detailed work, but it takes a lot of patience and pencils. Okay, and now I'm going to use my pencil, black pencil, just to get some of those feathery, spiky little feathers in around there. If you have other coloured pencils, then go for those, whatever you've got. I've got heaps, but they're just too far away at the moment. Now I'm going to push this in a little bit under here. So when you first put your first layers down, it's okay to push them in, but then as you build up, you want to not push so much so that you get a lovely feeling of texture. So that the eyes could probably do with a bit more work. But in the meantime, I'm just going to get some of this in here. And see under the eye, so I'll just change subjects for a sec. So I've rubbed some red in around under this eye here, around in there. And so that's actually not feathers, it's more skin. On this side, it looks like there's more little feathers poking out from it, but it's skin underneath. So push some of this in too, because I'm going to fill up the tooth of the paper. And so over here on the left side under the eye where the red section is, it looks like little hairs, little feathers coming out of there. But on the other side, it's kind of wrinkly, isn't it? You can see there's some little lines. So what I'm doing is using my black pencil to mark in those wrinkly shadows, I guess, of the skin around there. We'll have to fix up the eye again. This bit here, which is brown. There's this little, like a gill kind of thing on the side there. That's too light, but I'm just putting that there so you can see what I'm talking about. There's this bit here that sort of comes out from the side of the face. And so it's darker inside here. Just using my blue for some shadow. And then it gets lighter on the edge. It's darker at the bottom there. So a bit of brown on that won't hurt. I'll put a bit of brown on there in a minute. Should have done that first, Jeannie. Because it's behind the face, basically. See how it's kind of sitting out behind the cheeks. That's in here. Then once you've got that in there, you might need a bit more blue. I'm going to pop some blue violet onto the left side of that because I want some shadow in there. And then I can come back over with my red and define that edge again of the face. In here. Looks like he's a drunk chicken. She, it. Okay. So now I'm going to just refine the face here. So where I put little black lines before, I've just marked some red lines over above them, just slightly above. So what I'm trying to create is a bit of a feeling of skin and texture. And so every one of those little wrinkles is catching the light on the top. And if I've put a black line and then a red line because it's a red underneath, and then I've just very lightly put a couple of little very light marks on the top of each one of those to try and create the contours and the light. This is my pale sandstone colour, and hopefully that's going to give me a little bit of texture. And if not, I can always come back in with my black pencil or my bit of charcoal and just darken up again some of those little wrinkly bits. And hopefully that'll kind of give it the feeling that it's catching the light on all those little ridges. Like that. Okay. See how that now looks like it's got light and dark on it and texture? It's not perfectly right, but it's enough to give us the idea. And then up above the eye too, there's some texture there. So I want to get a bit of shadow and dark in there too. And bulge that eyeball out a little bit more. And add a bit more orange to brighten it up a bit. It's probably too bulgy now. So then I can come back over that and just soften off the edge. So the lovely thing with pastels is you can kind of repair things a little bit as you go. And so if you put something down and you didn't mean to, or you want to change it, then it's reasonably easy to just undo stuff. You can either erase it or go over it, and it kind of will get rid of things if you need to. I'm saving the shine for the eye for later, because that's when you get the joy. That's when you get the high notes, I call them. And back over to this other eye now, so I'm just tidying that one up. A bit of shadow back in there. A bit more light around there. So it's a bit fiddly as you start to get to the detail. So we'll come back to them in a minute and finish those off. What I want to do now is get into the beak and the red sections. So I'm just going to pop some of this sandstone colour onto the beak. This is like a mid-tone for this beak area. And I can highlight the lighter sections and darken off any of the darker bits as I go. But I need to get a base down first to work with. So I'm going to put this one down and just make sure I get that into all the right spots within that beak area. And so now I can pick up my lighter pastel. So this is the lighter one. It's not white. I haven't used that yet. And I can lighten up that side of the beak so you can see there's a light there and over there and up in here. So just kind of looking at where the light's catching on it. And this is what's going to give it some contour and make it look like it's turning and that it's a solid object or thing that you could touch. Okay, that eye is so bad. It's all the dust, it's disturbing me. Hang on. It's lost its roundness. I have to fix it, sorry. Can't keep looking at it and not fix it. It's better. Okay, I'll come back to that. So on the beak, we want to get a bit of dark down through here. So you can see there's dark just through there. And to pop that in, I'm just using a short bit of my brown pastel on its side and tilt it again. So kind of tilted towards one end and then patching it on basically where that dark bit is, or the shadow side. So that runs down through there. And then underneath we've got a bit of you can see a little ridge on the beak down here. So if you draw a fine line or a fine-ish line through there, then that will give you that little ridge section. I'm just going to touch up some of the brown through here as well. So what I'm doing is putting a bit of the brown around the base of the beak and around the face on top of that dark shadow area that we did under the neck earlier, because that will kind of then bring these little brown feathers that are just under the beak forward and still leave that dark shadow so that it looks like it's going back into the neck. Okay, cool. A little bit of line across there. So there's quite a lot of detail in this when you look at it. So that's his little beak. I can just push that in gently just to soften off the edges a tad and get that to sort of look like it's 3D or folding out. Cool, cool. Now let's get some red on here. So I'm just going to come back into this little section over here that's got some red on it. There's also some light on there because the edge of that's catching the light, so we can pop that on in a minute. And then we're going to do these two things that are hanging down here, droopy bits. Get some red onto there. And that side. So the one on the right is slightly darker, isn't it? Because it's further back and in shadow. So to darken that off, you could add a bit of purple or brown just to sort of send it further away. And then we can add a little bit more light onto the left-hand side one on the edge of it to make it come forward and give us that direction of light. I'm just dabbing it with my fingers. It's a small space, so it's a little bit tricky to get your fingers in there to push it in a bit more. And that's when blenders come in handy. So if you have any blenders, that might be the thing to use. I'm just going to pop a bit of orange on this light side of this one, just to see what happens. It's quite nice. I like the orange. It's got a lovely warm kind of tinge to it. There we go. So back to the red. I'm just going to smush the red around where I can see red around here on the face. Bit of red up there. This is quite a long stick of red. Probably should break it so that I can use a smaller area. I will do that. There we are. That's better. Now I can lie it right down and just sort of smush it around. So it feels sad to break them because, you know, we pay a fair bit of money for these things, but sometimes you just have to so that you can use it the best way possible. So I'm just getting some red down on the paper. I'm going to blend all that in and then I'll build up on it a little bit more. So I'll just come across the top of the head here. So this little crest on top of the head, it's got a light section on the top of it and then it's casting a shadow. So that's why we've got that dark patch up underneath it, which I probably need to darken a bit more now that I look at it, just to make it, you know, look like it's got more shadow. And then that one there comes through there. So now I've got a fair bit of red down on there and I've pushed that in. And then work on building it up a little bit. So I'm just going to lightly run that in with my fingers. So what I want it to do is just for the pigment to hang on to the paper a bit, and then we can start to do some shadow and light. As I said before, it's hard to get your finger into those small spots. But if you have a blender, that will be really helpful. So I'm going to tip off my dust again. Just going to put a bit more red in here. So this is when you get to this point and you kind of start to look around and notice where you might need to add a little bit of extra colour or highlight or something. Tip that off. So now, what do we need to do now? We need to put some more hair or feathers over this eye. That's bothering me. Bring that across there, cover that up a little bit more. Rightio, so let's get some shadow into this crest. So let's first go back into the top of the head and put some blue violet in there, because there's nice shadow in there. And then you can see that on the crest we've got kind of three pieces. And so there's this one in the middle that sort of sits on top of the one that's going off to the left. So we want to get a bit of shadow onto that one on the left-hand side so that it looks like it's a solid thing. So I've just wiped a bit of blue violet just across there and just gently sort of blend it in a little bit. And that's now giving me that nice feeling of the crest, or the part of the crest that's coming forward or sticking out more. And then it's kind of darker in there too, where it's folding sort of over the top of itself. And then there's a little bit of a shadow on that section that comes out to the left and in towards the background as well. I haven't got the shape of that one quite right. So it kind of arcs down a little bit and then out, like little fingers that come out from the end of it. I am going to pick up a blender and push that in just because I can't get my fingers into that small space. So rubber tip blenders are really handy for this kind of thing. They just let you get into little small tight spots that your fingers are too big for. Okay. Here. And you get different shaped tips too. So this one's probably not exactly right. So that's our little crest, and I can see I need to add more shadow. So if I'm trying to get form into something, you've got to find the shadows in the light. So there's got to be more shadow in there that tells me it's kind of folding over itself, and then it comes forward down towards the beak, so it's lighter on the top there, isn't it? And you can emphasize those things, you know, use a little bit of drama to emphasize things if you want to, just to create a bit more contrast and to bring something forward. So for instance, I want to bring this crest, red crest, forward from the face, and so I've got to have shadow behind it to do that. And then there's also shadow, if you notice around in here, there's a little kind of fold of skin in there, isn't there? And so I've put a bit of blue violet just there, and if I softly just pull that down, it should hopefully, yeah, give me a feeling of texture. And then if I pop a bit of my orange or your light, whatever your light colour is, you might want to use yellow or a creamy colour just to bring that forward a little bit. So the light colours will bring it forward and the darks will send it back. Makes sense? And then on top of the nose here, there's a little shine. Now, I probably should use something a bit lighter in there, and I can go over that again and lighten it up. And see how all those different tones now have created the feeling of texture. So you can actually see, you know, where it folds away and where the skin's kind of folding over each other because of the light and the dark. And don't be afraid to emphasize that because it makes it a little bit more interesting. So up on the top of this ridge, top of that one on the left, there's a shine, and on the top of the one that's coming out in front in the middle, there's also a little shine because the light's catching it. And you could say the same just in here in the dip, so that bit there. So this is when you've got to start to look for the bits of light. Cool, cool. And so I popped orange down on these gill thingies before, just because that's where the light is, but I feel like I need to add a bit more light there. So I'm going to use the beak colour, which is this sandstone, light sandstony colour. And I'm going to pop a bit of that right on that edge there because that's catching some light. And if you just do it softly, so don't do a hard, sharp line, just kind of smudge it around on the edge there, and it'll give it a lovely little glow. And I can do the same up here on the top of the crest. Again, just light little smudges, not a hard mark. And it just keeps the light soft. So you could kind of run around the picture with that in your hand and think, where else do I need to add a little bit of light? So on that other gill on the right there's like a shine on the top right of it. So you could pop a bit of light there. And then down through these thingies that hang down. See, there's some light on the left side of that one. And it's sort of an uneven line. It's very textured, isn't it? So what I'm doing is just running this down on the side. I'm not doing a hard mark. I'm just sort of letting it sit on the surface and pulling it across gently so that it's giving me a nice soft mark rather than a really hard one. There's also, now that I'm looking for it, a little shine of light on the edge of the feathers, just here at the side of the face. So again, you can use your sandstone or cream colour just to get a very gentle edge on there. It's nothing too bright or obvious, but it's just, it is actually quite bright in the picture. Maybe we need to brighten that up a little bit more. Like that maybe. So I'm just going to run around it with my lighter pastel and lighten up in a couple of spots. So this is when you want to start to notice the lights and the highlights and things. You might want to add a few more in the feathers down here, just for fun. And then, tip my dust off again. Okay, so now it's time to kind of reassess everything. Check your picture, hold that up against your painting and figure out, you know, or check where things are, or maybe they need to be slightly different, or you might need to put a few little marks in here and there to indicate different things. I'm just looking at the top of the beak now, and it's got quite a defined mark or arc at the top there, and there's a little shadow between the red section and the beak, the beginning of the beak. So I'm using my black charcoal because it's just, I can get a smaller mark with it, and it's not too black, it's still quite soft. So I can use that to get a bit of extra tone or dark in there that's not too strong. And so just gently, gently softening up all those things. I'm going to cover up that eye a bit more. Yeah. And so just run around with either your charcoal or your black pencil and put in a few little defined marks where you might feel like you need to do that. So charcoal is really nice for shadows, you know, to get some more kind of shadow, just soft shadows towards the end if you want a bit more texture. I feel like I need to go much darker in here. So that that red really pops out. And then if you need to sharpen up any edges, you can do that with the edge of your pastels, so you can kind of run around things and get the edges nice and crisp, you know, especially on these red duvas. And as you're doing that, you'll kind of think, oh, there needs to be more dark in there, because otherwise it's not giving me enough shadow or contrast. So you can just sort of touch all those things up as you go. This is adding all the details, getting into the detail a little bit. Check the shape of your beak and running around under there. A few little creases maybe in these things that hang down. They're quite textured, those. They look really rough and bumpy. So if you put a few little lines or marks on there, that might help to make them feel that way. I feel like I want a bit more light just on this side of the face here. Just under the eye, it's a little bit lighter there because all the light's sort of catching on that side. And then maybe a bit more feather on the edges here. Soften that off a little bit, and then some more dark under this eye. So a little bit of a shadow in there. And I think we're just about done. We're going to have to wrap it up now because we've gone over time. Final thing we've got to do though, before we do that, is pop some shine on the eyes. So where's my white? Here it is. I have a little white pastel. So when you want to pop a shine on, you can see on the left eye we've got a little bit, and I'm just going to hold the corner of it down and just sort of wiggle it a little bit so that it kind of puts this bright bit of light on there. And you don't want to blend that in or it'll just turn to mud. And same over here on the right eye. So top right, we need a bright shine just there. And that just brings him to life, doesn't it? Just makes him pop. If you wanted to pop a little bit of white just in a couple of lighter spots, for instance, on the side of the beak there, then you could do that. But don't overdo the white, because if you do, it kind of gets lost and doesn't become the brightest anymore. I've just popped a couple of little light white bits down here in these feathers because I wanted to highlight those a bit more. But be very sparing with your white. Don't go crazy with it. And that is a chook. Ta-da! Okay, so if you have been doing this video with me, I hope you've enjoyed it. I would love to get back into that tail actually and just kind of grey that off a little bit more and send it off into the distance. It's still looking a bit too blue for me. And so I'm picking up my brown now, I'm just running over it lightly to blur that off a little bit. Maybe it needs some more orange or something in there to tie it in with everything else, but you don't want to brighten it up too much. So that's our chook, and I hope you enjoyed doing him. If you would like to send me your photo, I would be delighted to see it and pop it into my newsletter. And yeah, and I'd love your feedback. So if you have any comments or questions, please get in touch and let me know what you're thinking. Because if I don't know that something didn't work out or you didn't understand something, then I can't fix it. So your feedback's really important to me, and it helps me continue to do this in an effective way. So thanks for coming. See you soon.